The garden glittered that morning, sunlight pouring over the orchids and marble tables I once dreamed of affording. I sat at the far end, a guest at my own house, the one I bought for my son, Lucas. The celebration was for Mother's Day, yet the show belonged to someone else. My son knelt before his mother-in-law, Delilah, and slipped a $30,000 diamond ring onto her finger. "For the woman who gave me the perfect wife," he said, and laughter rippled like champagne bubbles. Then Linda, my daughter-in-law, slid a pink plastic mug toward me. "Best mom ever," the decal half peeled off. "I hope you still have enough teeth to drink tea," she murmured, smiling. Everyone froze. I smiled too, to hide the moment my heart cracked. They gave me humiliation. I decided to give them a lesson they'd never forget. Beneath the table, I opened my phone and quietly canceled every transfer, every card, every monthly deposit that kept their luxury breathing. That night, in my small Santa Rosa apartment, I stared at the plastic mug under the lamplight, beside a photo of Lucas at 8 years old, grinning with 2 missing front teeth. I whispered, "You loved me back then, didn't you?" Then I opened my safe. Files, invoices, and bank statements piled like ghosts. Over $1 million gone in 5 years. Failed ventures, luxury cars, endless vacations. Love had turned into a bank statement. I wasn't angry anymore, just hollow. But in that emptiness, something sharp sparked awake. It was time to audit not only money, but loyalty. The next morning, I met with my attorney, Marion Blake. "I want to change my will," I said. "Not out of revenge, out of education." Together, we drafted new conditions. If Lucas ever wished to inherit, he'd need a year of stable employment, no debts, and proof of volunteer work. The rest of my assets, 70%, would go to a new foundation, the Mothers Left Behind Fund, to help older women abandoned by their families. When I signed, the pen didn't tremble. At the company office, my CFO, Aaron Patel, looked startled when I told him to revoke Lucas's financial authority. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I've never been surer," I said. Heart and Loom isn't a family charity. We rewrote insurance beneficiaries, leases, and shares. By the time I gathered the papers into a blue binder labeled "The Plastic Cup," I felt light, free of decades of blind giving. I called Lucas to meet me that afternoon. When he entered the conference room, sunlight cutting across his face, I saw not the boy I once lifted, but the man who'd grown comfortable taking. On the table sat the pink mug. "Am I worth what's printed here?" I asked quietly. His smile faltered. "Mom, that was just a joke." "No," I said, opening the binder. "This is the joke." I read aloud each sum. 50,000 for the sports startup, 30,000 for the restaurant, 100,000 for the tech idea, 20,000 for Cancun, 15 for baby items that never came. Over $1 million, Lucas. And you gave me this. My voice didn't rise. Calm made it sharper, he stammered. "Things are hard. I just wanted to give Linda a better life." I looked at him steadily. "A better life doesn't come from spending your mother's retirement." When he said Delilah never judged him, I replied, "Because she wasn't the one paying your bills." I slid an envelope toward him. Inside is a restitution plan. 3 conditions. 1 year without my money. Treat me like a person, not an ATM. And apologize publicly. His jaw clenched. You're controlling me. No, I said. I'm teaching you boundaries. When he asked, do you still love me? I smiled faintly. A mother's love never ends, Lucas. But it no longer includes money. That night, a hospital call interrupted dinner. Delilah had been in a car accident. Her name listed me as the emergency contact because Lucas had used mine on her insurance. I went anyway. She sat upright in a gown, pride barely cracking. Lucas said you'd come, she murmured. He says you always do. Not anymore, I replied. When I showed her the receipts for the diamond ring and cruise paid from my account, her poise collapsed. I didn't know, she whispered. No, you didn't think, I corrected. I called Lucas on speaker. Tell her where the money came from. He hesitated. From Mom Rebecca. Delilah's eyes closed. Then I owe you an apology. Outside the hospital, she turned to me. You have every right to be angry, but don't hate us. We're mothers, after all. I sighed. No hate, Delilah. Just boundaries. 2 nights later, Lucas came to my door, asking for another chance. Behind him, Linda's mascara streaked. You're cruel, she cried. We're your family. I said nothing. Just turned on the television where security footage played. 12 clips of her demanding money. Her face went pale. You recorded us? No, I said. The camera did. The sign's right there. My niece Tessa, 16 and brilliant, stepped forward holding printed texts. 46 messages from Linda in 1 year. 39 asking for transfers. Silence. Lucas's shoulders sagged. I laid an envelope on the table. 3 conditions, I repeated. Meet them, and maybe you'll earn back my trust. Linda shouted she didn't need my money and stormed out, dragging Lucas behind her. I locked the door and signed the new lease, writing beneath my name, effective the day you learn independence. For the first time in decades, the house was quiet. No cries for help, no texts begging. Just peace. The first 2 months tested every stitch of my resolve. People accustomed to rescue will always tug at the rope to see if it still holds. Week 1, Lucas called at 12:11 a.m., voice scraped thin. He had paid rent 2 days late and wanted a bridge. I said no and let the silence sit. Week 2, Linda described an allergic reaction and imported medicine. I reminded her the hospital accepted insurance, then ended the call at 9:04 p.m. Week 3, a string of messages arrived before dawn about a crib sale ending at 6 a.m. I set the phone face down beside a mug of chamomile and let the sun rise without answering. Saying no didn't feel triumphant. It felt like physical therapy on an old injury. Painful, necessary, and promising a steadier walk. Work steadied me. At 8:45 a.m. on a bright Monday, we launched the Mothers Left Behind Fund, inside a quiet conference room at Heart and Loom. No photographers, just the women who had kept our needles singing through recessions and summers without air conditioning. I told them what the fund would do: small legal aid, emergency grants, skills workshops, and above all, dignity. We allocated a portion of profits for the first 2 years and created a volunteer track that anyone in the company could join. Tessa stood at my side in a white shirt, taking names. When I set the old pink plastic cup on the shelf beside our new logo, sunlight turned its cheap gloss into something almost ceremonial. A symbol is only as small as the lesson it holds. Our first case was a 72-year-old librarian named Mercedes, who had signed a deed she didn't understand to help her son. When she told me she only wanted a quiet room to read and a kettle for tea, I felt my throat tighten with a memory I didn't want to revisit. We found her a studio and a part-time desk job at a community center by 4:20 p.m. that same Friday. When she squeezed my hands and said, "You made space for my breathing," I realized I had been starving for that simple sentence, a thank you, unentangled from a request. Back at the company, boundaries sharpened culture. I met Aaron at 10 a.m. each Tuesday to review invoices. No family charges slipped through. Every discretionary expense required 2 signatures and an external checker. Some grumbled, then watched the numbers improve. Profit rose not because we squeezed workers, but because we stopped leaking into the abyss of someone else's image. A seam holds when you respect the thread. Meanwhile, the house stayed quiet in a way that felt both peaceful and tragic. Linda tried charm at my door one afternoon at 2:30 p.m., palms open, voice careful. "You're making everything harder," she said, eyes shimmering. Tessa stepped from the study and, gentle as snowfall, asked her not to cross boundaries she had agreed to. The girl's steadiness humbled me. After Linda left, Tessa brewed tea and we sat listening to the clock, 2 women of different ages, sharing a single backbone. In mid-March, a letter arrived, scented faintly with lavender. Delilah's handwriting slanted, the loops smaller than I remembered. She had reviewed the receipts and recordings and admitted that praise had become her family's currency, where gratitude should have stood. Her apology didn't absolve the past, but it opened a window. I stood in the garden at 6:10 p.m., reading the letter twice, the air cool and clean. A different kind of wealth. April lapped in with another test. Lucas phoned at 7:32 p.m., asking careful word for seed money for a new venture. I said no without spikes, then hung up and walked the block. I noticed lawns I had never seen because I had always been rushing to fix something. In May, Linda caught me in the parking lot outside Heart and Loom at 3:05 p.m. Her eyes were tired, her posture lowered to honesty. "Do you really feel no guilt?" she asked. "I did," I said, "for enabling you. That guilt is gone." She turned away without drama. I watched her leave and felt a thread snap, then lie still. Not everything needed mending. Work filled the spaces where worry used to nest. The fund's cases multiplied: a widow whose nephew had drained her account, a retired bus driver navigating a predatory lease, a grandmother learning to budget again after years of being handed an allowance by her own children. We didn't save anyone. We taught people how to save themselves. In teaching, I learned the lesson I should have taught Lucas a decade earlier. Mercy requires structure, or it rots. By early June, the ache had softened to a dull echo. Nights belonged to sleep instead of alarms. I kept the plastic cup on my desk not as a wound, but as a compass, the cheap handle pointing back to the line I would not cross again. One evening, I scrolled through old photos. Lucas at 8 with a gap-toothed grin. Lucas at 15 building a slanted bookshelf. Lucas at 22 hugging me at graduation with a seriousness that promised everything. Love didn't vanish. It needed new plumbing. Then, on a gentle evening washed peach by the setting sun, my phone rang at 6:48 p.m. It was Lucas. His voice had dropped into a quieter gear, words moving carefully, like a man learning to carry weight without dropping it. "Mom," he said, "I want to take you to lunch. No money talk. I promise." I let the request breathe in the space between us. Part of me stayed still. Part of me pulsed with an old, foolish hope that wasn't foolish anymore. "Where?" I asked. "The little diner by the river," he said. "Tomorrow, at 12 p.m. I told him I'd be there, hung up, and stood in the doorway watching the lavender bend in the breeze. Boundaries, I thought, are not walls. They are doors with locks and keys we learn to use. That night, I opened my leather journal at 8:22 p.m. and wrote a single sentence. If a hand reaches out tomorrow, let it be to hold, not to take. Then I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and fell asleep in a home that finally felt like mine. The next day dawned bright and clear, as if the city itself were holding its breath for what might happen. When I arrived at the diner by the river, the morning sun painted the glass walls in soft gold. The waitress, a young woman with kind eyes, led me to a booth by the window. Outside, gulls circled lazily above the slow-moving water. I ordered coffee, hands steady, heart not so much. At exactly noon, Lucas appeared. Not in a tailored blazer or polished shoes like before. He wore jeans, a faded navy shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. No watch, no pretense. He looked like a man trying to start over. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Lucas." We sat. The silence that followed was not the awkward kind, but the cautious one, shared by people testing if forgiveness might fit. "I got a job," he said finally, glancing at me. "Construction supply. Small team, good people. I've been there 6 months." I smiled. Small. Genuine. "I'm glad." He nodded, then traced his finger along the rim of his glass. "I paid off my credit card last week. First time in 10 years. His voice cracked slightly. "I just wanted you to know. I'm learning." Something uncoiled inside me, slow and warm. "That's good, Lucas. I always hoped you would." He looked at me, eyes raw. "I was angry for a long time. I thought you loved money more than me, but I get it now. You're teaching me something I refused to learn." I sipped my coffee and said quietly, "Love without responsibility isn't love. It's permission to stay broken." He nodded, tears glinting but not falling. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you. For letting Linda," I raised a hand gently. "You don't owe me words, Lucas." You owe yourself growth. We both smiled at that, faint but real. The waitress brought our meals, grilled salmon for me, a turkey sandwich for him. We ate in silence, interrupted only by the clink of silverware and the murmur of water against the pier. Halfway through, Lucas reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table. "I sold the diamond," he said. "This isn't that. This is just..." I opened it. Inside lay a silver locket, simple and elegant, with 2 tiny photos. One of him at 8, toothless grin and muddy baseball jersey. One of me, holding him at the hospital the day he was born. "I found the old negatives," he said. "Thought you might want them back." I touched the locket lightly. "You kept these all these years?" He nodded. "Even when I didn't deserve to." Something inside me shifted again. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "Thank you," I whispered. When we finished lunch, Lucas stood and asked if he could walk me to my car. The river shimmered beside us, sunlight catching on ripples like tiny mirrors. He hesitated at the curb. "Maybe one day," he said, "we can come back here and bring the girls." "Maybe," I said, "when you're ready." He smiled, small and sincere, then hugged me. Just once, firm and steady, like he used to when he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. And then he walked away. I stood there, watching his figure grow smaller against the skyline, until he disappeared into the pulse of the city. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Some stories end with victory, others with closure. Mine ended with both, because peace isn't the absence of pain. It's knowing you survived it and built something stronger in its place. As I drove home, the silver locket gleamed against my chest, and for the first time in years, I whispered, not a prayer, but a promise. To keep living, keep giving, and keep teaching the lesson that love with boundaries is still love, only wiser. And now, to you listening to my story, if you ever had to rebuild your heart from ashes, tell me in the comments where your strength began. Stay until the end of my next story. It begins with a phone call that changes everything. A week later, the phone call came. It was a Thursday morning, soft sunlight spilling across my kitchen counter as I watered the orchids by the window. The house smelled faintly of rosemary and warm bread. Peace had become my daily routine. Quiet mornings, gentle music, no sudden knocks or demands. So when the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. But something, instinct maybe, made me pick up. "Mrs. Hart?" The voice was calm, official. "This is Officer Raymond from Sonoma County PD. We have someone here who requested to see you." I froze. "Who?" A pause, then, "Linda Morrison." My breath caught. "Why would she?" "She asked specifically for you. She's at St. Helena Recovery Center. She said you're the only person who might listen." For a long moment, I said nothing. The orchids glowed pale pink under the morning light, fragile and resilient all at once. "Tell her I'll come tomorrow," I finally said. The next morning, the drive felt longer than it should have. St. Helena stood at the foot of the hills, white walls and lavender hedges trying to disguise the fact that it was, at its core, a facility for starting over. Linda looked smaller than I remembered. Thin, pale, her hair tied back loosely. When she saw me, her eyes widened, uncertain whether to smile or cry. "You came," she whispered. "I did," I said. She fidgeted with the cuff of her cardigan. "I'm clean now. Been here 3 months. I lost everything, Rebecca. The house, the car, even the friends who only cared when the champagne was flowing." She laughed softly, bitterly. I guess karma came dressed in designer shoes. I didn't reply. I simply waited. "I know I can't undo what I did," she continued. "What I said. But I needed to tell you I see it now. The way I treated you, the way I twisted your kindness into weakness. You didn't deserve any of it." Her voice cracked. "When Lucas left me, I told everyone you ruined us. But the truth is, you saved him. You made him face the man he was becoming. I hated you for it, because I couldn't face myself." I looked at her for a long time. The woman who once mocked me over a pink plastic cup was gone. What sat before me was someone hollowed out by her own reflection. "Do you plan to stay here?" I asked gently. "For now," she said. "There's a program helping women rebuild their lives after addiction and abuse. I want to help. Maybe that's my way of paying back what I took." Something loosened in my chest. "That sounds like a start," I said. She looked at me, tears glistening. "You really don't hate me?" "I don't carry hate anymore," I said quietly. "It's too heavy for the kind of life I want." Linda nodded, her shoulders trembling. "Thank you." When I left the recovery center, the air outside was cool, touched by the scent of rain. I stood there for a moment, feeling something I hadn't expected. Closure. Not for her, not even for Lucas, but for myself. Driving home, I realized forgiveness wasn't about letting others off the hook. It was about setting yourself free from the weight of what they did. That evening, I sat on my porch as dusk painted the sky lavender and gold. The silver locket lay warm against my chest. In the garden below, Tessa watered the roses. She looked up at me and smiled, the same kind of smile that carries through generations, quiet and strong. "Grandma," she said, "the foundation just got another call. A woman from Ohio. She said she heard your story online and wants to donate." I smiled. "Tell her thank you, sweetheart." Every story helps another woman stand up. The wind rustled through the oak trees, and I thought of all the women: Mercedes, Dorothy, Linda, myself. Different names, same thread. We weren't victims. We were survivors, stitching our lives back together with dignity. When the first stars blinked awake, I whispered to the night, "Thank you for the second chances." Then I picked up my journal and wrote, "Peace doesn't come when justice is served. It comes when you no longer need revenge to feel whole." Tomorrow, I would wake early again, water the orchids, bake bread, answer letters from women who'd found courage in my story. And maybe, just maybe, I'd call Lucas and tell him the truth. That the best thing I ever gave him wasn't money. It was the chance to start again. Now, I'll ask you, if life gave you a second chance to rewrite your ending, would you take it? Comment below and stay for the next story. It begins with a letter that arrives 20 years too late. Back that now, continue. Chechubitid and I. It came one quiet afternoon in late September, wrapped in a pale blue envelope, its corners softened by time. The return address was faded, almost illegible, but the handwriting, elegant, looping, unmistakable, stopped me cold. Marcus Patterson. My brother had been gone for years. I'd handled his estate, lived in the penthouse he'd left behind, and built the life he'd wanted for me. So this letter shouldn't have existed. Yet there it was, postmarked from an attorney's office in upstate New York, with a single note on the back in bold ink. Deliver after final settlement. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one that now held stacks of letters from the foundation, and held the envelope like it might break. Then slowly, I opened it. Inside was one page, typed, not handwritten, and a small brass key taped to the corner. If you're reading this, Inns, you've survived what I feared would destroy you. I had the file ready, the evidence, everything. But there was one more secret I couldn't leave behind. Not about them. About us. 30 years ago, when I walked out after our father's funeral, I took something that wasn't mine. I told myself it was justice, but it was greed. It was a small lockbox from his desk, the one he said held documents for the children's future. I never opened it. I was too ashamed. But before I died, I gave it to Margaret for safekeeping, with instructions to send you this letter when you no longer lived in fear. The key belongs to that box. It's in Margaret's archive. Whatever's inside, it's yours. And maybe our father's truth, too. I read the letter twice. Then again, until the words blurred. My father's lockbox. My father. The man whose silence had shaped both of us. By evening, I was standing outside Margaret Whitfield's old law office, now run by her son, Anthony. He'd known who I was the moment I introduced myself. She mentioned you, he said softly, leading me to a back room. The walls were lined with safety boxes, their brass tags glinting under fluorescent light. He stopped at one, marked Patterson, number 07. She told me to hold it until you came. Said you'd know what to do. My hands shook as I slid the brass key into the lock. The lid creaked open, and inside lay a bundle of documents tied with an aged ribbon, a photograph, and a smaller envelope labeled, "For both of you." The photograph was old. Our parents standing outside a farmhouse, our mother's hand on Marcus's shoulder, my father's on mine. Behind them, a woman I didn't recognize, dark hair, tired eyes, holding an infant. Beneath it, a birth certificate. Marcus William Patterson. Mother, Evelyn Grant. Inns Marisol Patterson. Mother, Evelyn Grant. And beneath that, Sarah Grant Patterson, born 1954. A sister. The air left my lungs. A sister neither of us had known existed. The smaller envelope contained a short note, written in my father's steady, deliberate handwriting. To my children, Marcus, Inns, and Sarah. If you ever find this, I hope time has softened the pain I caused. I lived with 2 families, 2 homes, and 2 versions of myself. I justified it as duty. It was cowardice. I loved you all, but I loved my comfort more. If you meet one day, be kinder than I was. You will find more of me in each other than you ever did in me. For a long time, I sat there in silence, the paper trembling in my hands. I wasn't angry, just stunned. Marcus must have discovered this secret and never told me. Maybe he couldn't bear to. "Mrs. Morrison," Anthony said quietly, "would you like me to help you locate her?" I nodded, still staring at the name. Sarah Grant Patterson. It took 2 weeks, dozens of calls, and a private search through old census archives before I found her. She lived in Vermont, in a small cottage by the woods. A retired nurse. 2 grown children. When I finally dialed her number, my throat went dry. "Hello?" Her voice was warm, steady. Older than mine by 2 years, perhaps, but calm in a way that made me feel like a child again. "Is this Sarah Patterson?" A pause. "It used to be." "Who's calling?" "My name is Inns." "Inns Morrison. I think we might be sisters." Silence. Then a soft, trembling laugh. "Marcus told me someone might call one day. He said you were stubborn, like me." "You knew about me?" "I found out 5 years ago," she said gently. "But I didn't want to intrude. You'd already lost so much." We spoke for hours about our mother, our father, Marcus. She told me she'd received a letter too, years ago, explaining everything. "I forgave him," she said quietly. "It wasn't easy, but grief teaches you patience." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. A sense of belonging. Marcus had left me wealth, justice, peace. But this was legacy. A month later, I drove to Vermont. The cottage sat near a lake surrounded by trees that shimmered gold in the autumn sun. Sarah opened the door before I knocked. We looked at each other, 2 women with the same eyes, the same cheekbones, the same quiet strength earned through loss. And then we hugged. No words, no explanations. Just 30 years of silence breaking in one breath. That night, as we sat by the fire drinking tea, she said, "Marcus used to send me letters. He always signed them, 'Tell her I'm proud,' even if I never said it." I smiled through tears. He was a difficult man to love. "So was our father," she replied. But we learned. The clock chimed softly. I realized I'd found the final piece of the story I didn't know I was still missing. Family, broken as it was, had come full circle. And maybe, after everything, betrayal, grief, justice, forgiveness, this was the quietest kind of miracle. Finding someone who shares your blood and your scars, and realizing both still mean life goes on. That night, before bed, I opened my journal and wrote one last line. Peace isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of everything that comes after. Now tell me, if a letter arrived decades after you thought your story was over, would you open it? Comment your answer below and stay until the next story. It begins with a funeral and ends with a secret that refuses to die. The funeral took place on a gray morning in late March. The sky was flat, pewter-colored, and the air carried that clean, metallic scent that comes before rain. I stood under a black umbrella beside Sarah, my newly found sister. We were burying Margaret Whitfield, the lawyer who had connected the dots of my past and, unknowingly, my future. Her son Anthony read a eulogy filled with grace. "My mother believed in unfinished stories," he said. "She used to say people aren't done when they think they are, only when they stop asking questions." I smiled faintly. That was Margaret, calm, relentless, and quietly brilliant. If not for her, I might still be picking scraps from dumpsters, instead of founding a foundation that now bore her name beside Harold's. The Morrison Whitfield Fund. After the service, Sarah and I walked back toward the cars, our shoes sinking into the damp earth. "You realize," she said softly, "Margaret probably knew about me. About us." I nodded. She knew everything. She just waited for the right moment to let it matter. Later that week, while sorting through her estate papers with Anthony, I found one last sealed envelope, this one addressed to Innes Morrison and Sarah Grant Patterson. Inside was a short note in Margaret's familiar handwriting. "I promised Marcus I'd watch over both of you. Consider this my final act of interference. There's another file in box 3B of my private archive. Label, Account Redwood. It's not financial, it's personal. You'll understand when you see it." The next morning, Sarah and I drove to the small records facility outside Albany. Box 3B waited on a steel shelf, its label neat, precise. Inside, there was a single item, a voice recorder, the kind reporters used in the 1980s, and a short transcript. Anthony pressed play. A low hiss filled the air. Then a voice, Marcus's voice. "If this reaches you, it means Margaret kept her word. I never stopped protecting you, Innes. But there's one thing I couldn't fix. The truth about Harold's death. I know you found the files, the recordings, the proof. But there was something else. Milani wasn't working alone. She had help from inside Harold's company. Someone high up who falsified medical reports to cover the poisoning. I couldn't prove it before I died. The man's name was Douglas Reeves. CFO. Heart and Loom Investments. My stomach turned. Heart and Loom. My company. I grabbed the transcript, scanning the typed lines. Reeves. The man I'd trusted to rebuild our financial division. The one who'd called me a miracle in heels when I saved the business after Harold's passing. He'd been there for every signature, every audit, every penny of my new foundation's accounts. "Is he still alive?" Sarah asked quietly. Anthony nodded grimly. "Very much alive. Retired in Miami. Still consults for Heart and Loom." The pieces clicked painfully into place. The missing numbers from Harold's accounts before his death. The quiet settlements after Milani's arrest. The one file I could never reconcile during my own audit. Redwood Investments. A shell corporation. "He's been skimming charity funds," I whispered, "using the foundation's name to wash what Milani started." Sarah exhaled sharply. "Then we finish it." 2 days later, I flew to Miami. The address listed on his consulting file led to a glass-walled mansion overlooking the water. the kind of place built from other people's money. When Douglas opened the door, he looked older, softer, but guilt has a way of rotting even expensive skin. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, smiling faintly. "What a surprise." "I doubt that," I replied. He invited me in, perhaps assuming this was another charitable visit. I let him talk, let him show off photographs of his boat, his awards, the Redwood Fund logo hanging above his desk. When I finally slid the file across the table, the smile died. "Marcus left me this," I said evenly, "and I've already sent a copy to the Department of Justice." He went pale. "You don't understand. Harold was going bankrupt." Milani offered me. "I understand perfectly," I cut in. "You sold my husband's life for a commission." His jaw worked silently. Outside, a thunderstorm rolled in from the Atlantic. "I don't want your money," I said, standing. "I want your confession. You can send it to my office by midnight. If you don't, tomorrow morning you'll be headline news." When I left, lightning cracked the sky behind me. By dawn, an email arrived. Subject line, "Confession, Redwood Case." Attached was a 12-page affidavit detailing how he and Milani had siphoned funds, falsified medication orders, and arranged Harold's treatment plan. It was more than enough for prosecution. By July, federal agents reopened the case. Douglas Reeves was indicted for conspiracy, fraud, and complicity in Harold's murder. His assets, $8.6 million, were seized and transferred to the Morrison Whitfield Fund. During the press conference, cameras flashed as I stood at the podium beside Sarah and Anthony. "This isn't vengeance," I said. "It's completion. My husband's name deserves peace, and now it has it." Afterward, Sarah squeezed my hand. "You finally closed the circle," she whispered. "Maybe," I said softly, "but I think the circle was meant for more than one life." That evening, back in my home, I placed Marcus's recorder beside the old pink plastic cup. The two objects that had, in different ways, rebuilt me. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world smelled new. I walked out onto the porch, the locket warm against my skin, and thought about the strange symmetry of it all. Betrayal and inheritance. Justice and forgiveness. Endings and beginnings. Then I lifted my glass of wine toward the sky and said quietly, "For Harold, for Marcus, for every woman who learned that peace is not a gift, it's a decision." The cicadas hummed, the stars returned, and somewhere in the night, I swear I could almost hear Marcus's voice again. Steady, wry, alive in memory. "Told you, little sister, you'd finish it." Now, tell me, if you uncovered a final secret that could rewrite everything you believed about your past, would you open that box? Comment below. And stay with me for the next story. It begins with a will and ends with a promise that refuses to stay buried. The will was read in a quiet, paneled office overlooking the Hudson River. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in pale stripes across the mahogany table, touching each of us, me, Sarah, and the lawyer, a soft-spoken man named Whitmore who handled estates for the Whitfield firm after Margaret's passing. "This is the final will of Mrs. Edna Hartwell," he began. The name hit me like a small tremor. Edna had been my mother's closest friend when I was a child, almost a second mother to me after my father's long absences. I hadn't spoken to her in decades. You were both listed as beneficiaries, Whitmore continued, glancing between Sarah and me. Sarah looked puzzled. I never met her, she whispered. Neither had I after childhood. Not really. I'd visited her house once, a place filled with photographs of other people's families, her husband, who died early, her nieces who lived far away. She'd always said she didn't believe in blood ties, only bonds you chose to keep. Whitmore opened the folder, producing 2 sealed envelopes and an old photograph. The picture showed my mother, my father, Edna, and another woman. A woman with eyes like mine. Mrs. Hartwell left a letter, he said, handing one envelope to me. She requested that you both read them privately before I disclosed the estate. I opened mine. The paper was yellowed, written in a fine, looping hand. My dear Inn, if this letter reaches you, then I have gone to the place where truth no longer frightens me. You once asked me, when you were 10, why your father always looked sad when he saw me. I told you it was grown-up sadness. I lied. I was his sister, not by marriage, by blood. Your father and I shared a mother who could not bear the shame of it. When your father left home, he vowed to build a different life. He succeeded, but the guilt stayed with him, and I stayed behind to keep his secret safe. He asked me to watch over you and Marcus. I tried. I truly did. He left you both his brilliance and his burden. But there was one more thing, something I could not risk giving you while he lived. It's in the box marked Hearth. Inside, you'll find the deed to the house he built in 1965 on Riverside Lane. It was never sold, never listed. He wanted it for his children. All of them. Including Sarah. Go there together. There's something waiting still. My pulse quickened. Sarah unfolded her own letter. Different handwriting, but the same theme. Her eyes widened. She said the same thing. That house. Riverside Lane. Whitmore cleared his throat. There's a small trust attached to that property. Enough for maintenance, but it's not about the money. Mrs. Hartwell was explicit. She wanted you to see it before deciding what to do. 2 days later, we drove north along the Hudson until the GPS led us to a narrow turn lined with oaks. The house at the end was modest. 2 stories of white siding and blue shutters, surrounded by wild roses. A brass plaque by the door read simply, Hearth House, 1965. Inside, it smelled of dust and cedar. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating furniture that seemed frozen in time. A piano, a bookshelf, framed photographs of my father as a boy. On the mantel sat a single envelope addressed to my children. Sarah and I exchanged a look before I opened it. If you are reading this, then you have both come home. This is where I planned to end my days, but I never found the courage. I built this house for the life I couldn't have with both of your mothers. One loved me for who I was, the other for who she believed I could become. I failed them both. But perhaps the house can hold what I could not. Peace. Do with it what you wish. Burn it, sell it, or live in it. But remember, blood and choice both bind us. And in this place, you are all equal. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of generations pressing through the air. Then Sarah said quietly, "We should keep it." I nodded, not as a memorial, as a refuge. We spent the weekend cleaning, scrubbing, opening windows. Beneath the dust, the house was beautiful, simple, sturdy, almost waiting for breath again. In the attic, we found boxes of old letters between our parents, fragments of a love that had never been allowed to live in daylight. One of them caught my eye, dated 1955. If we can't have one home, promise me we'll build one for them instead. I ran my hand over the words, tears welling. He did, I whispered. He built us a home. It just took half a lifetime to find it. That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass. You know, she said, maybe this was all he ever wanted, for us to meet here, finally, without the lies. Maybe, I agreed. And maybe Edna knew we wouldn't find peace until we stood in the same house. When I returned to the city the next day, I called Anthony and told him to transfer the property to the Morrison Whitfield Foundation. We'll turn it into a retreat, I said, for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal or loss. Somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. He paused, then said softly, Margaret would have loved that. A month later, Hearth House opened its doors as a sanctuary, a place for second chances. The first 3 residents arrived in October. A widow from Boston, a woman recovering from bankruptcy after her husband's deceit, and a young mother escaping an abusive marriage. Each of them stood in that same foyer, eyes wide with both grief and hope. When I visited, I saw something familiar in their faces, the same fragile strength I'd carried when I first walked out of the wreckage of my old life. Sarah joined me on the porch. It's strange, isn't it? She said. We came looking for answers and ended up giving them to others. I smiled. That's how healing works. You pass it forward. As dusk settled, the lights in the house glowed warm through the windows, gold against the gathering dark. We had taken the ruins of a family secret and built something new from it, something alive. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood what Margaret, Harold, and even my father had tried to teach in their own flawed ways. That the truth, however painful, isn't the end. It's the doorway to peace. I looked toward the sky, where the first stars flickered, and whispered, we made it home. Now tell me, if you discovered a hidden legacy meant to heal what once broke you, would you claim it? Share your thoughts below, and stay with me for the next story. It begins with a wedding toast and ends with a betrayal caught on camera.